I see a lot of attorneys here in the audience, so be careful. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Welcome. A lot of you have never been up here to Samuel French. These are our fairly new offices. We've been here over a year, maybe two. And although you can't tell, we're shut down right now, but we have 50 employees that work here at Samuel French. We have another 10 in Los Angeles and another 14 in London. So we're a very busy organization. We publish and license stage plays and musicals, Broadway, off-Broadway, regional, community theater, colleges, high schools. We're in the secondary market. I wanted to, I'm glad that you're here, and this is a great opportunity to meet and have a conversation with John Breglio. Before I read John's bio as an introduction, I just want to say that when I started in this business in the early 1990s, I worked for an older attorney named Val Da Silva. And there was one name that struck awe and fear to all of us in the business in those days, and that was John Breglio. He was simply the most powerful theatrical attorney and influencer for that time and for many years. I don't know if you remember this, but I actually got to sit at a table with you and negotiated with Al. I really didn't say too much. I think it was on City of Angels.
Oh, wow.
We had David Simple. But it was heated.
It was at Al's office.
Yeah, at the glass table.
At the 510
At the Delmonico, yes.
Delmonico Hotel. The only lawyer I knew who had his office at the Delmonico Hotel.
Right.
There was Al. Oh yeah, I remember that. I remember that specific meeting.
I was at that table. You probably don't remember me, but anyway, John Breglio is a Broadway producer and entertainment lawyer with Paul Weiss, and the author of I Want to Be a Producer: How to Make a Killing on Broadway or Get Killed. John has spent nearly 40 years working in all sectors of the entertainment industry, including theater, motion pictures, publishing, and music. As an entertainment lawyer, he was instrumental in helping his clients to produce and finance plays, musicals, and films. In 2008, he retired from his law practice to produce plays, musicals, and films independently, including the critically acclaimed revivals of A Chorus Line and Dreamgirls. And I just want to say that in preparation of this interview, of course, I read this book. In fact, I read this book, which is why I wanted to interview John. I love this book. For those of you who have read some other books on producing theater, whether it's Donald Faber's Chestnut, Option to Opening, or Producing Theater, this book is really unique in that not only is it a book of stories about Broadway and great anecdotes, but it's really the fundamental nuts and bolts of producing on Broadway, and for that matter, producing anything. He goes chapter by chapter through the various stages of producing a play or a musical, and I just found it to be fascinating and I think invaluable to producers, to authors, and to theater lawyers, a lot of which you know the material, but hearing it in a different way, seeing it in black and white, I learned a lot myself.
I was very lucky to get an internship, summer internship, when I was in law school at Paul Weiss. At the time, Paul Weiss had as one of its senior partners, John Wharton, who was in the name of the firm, Paul Weiss with Wharton Garrison. And John was indisputably the dean of entertainment lawyers in New York. I mean, the entertainment law practice was quite small. In fact, I never heard of entertainment lawyers when I was at law school. But because I had a background in theater and music, I went to law school. I didn't know what to do. I was going to be drafted. I thought I wasn't Vietnam War, etc. And I read about it in the New York Times. It was a profile of John Wharton in the New York Times. and it was this firm that did this work with artists. So I said, maybe I can use my legal background for this. So I went there, worked with John Wharton, and another gentleman by the name of Robert Montgomery, who also was renowned as a movie lawyer. And between John Wharton and Bob Montgomery, I was really blessed to have these two real giants in the entertainment business teach me the ropes. I mean, you can't really, as any of you who know entertainment business, you can't really learn this business in law school or in books, or you have to do it. And my first show was a musical based on Gone with the Wind, which was an international flop. And first movie was Frank Perry, an independent movie, Diary of a Mad Housewife. So that's what got me going. And then I had background in, I represented, while I was there, Arthur Miller, and book publishing, and we represented Jim Dine, and the firm really represented everybody in the entertainment business with the fine arts even. And that gave me a phenomenal grounding. But my heart really was always in the theater. That's what I really loved. Maybe didn't make the most money, but it certainly was what I loved doing the most. And John Wharton, when I joined the firm, was in the 70s, and I asked him if I could really try to build it back up, because he was really retired and Bob Montgomery was filled with motion picture work. So I really built that practice back up because it was my love. And I wasn't really content to kind of just do the legal work. That was sort of boring to me because I had a background in the theater and I studied music for many years, and I really wanted to get as close as I could to the art, but helping the artists. And that's what I tried to cultivate, and I was, again, you know, serendipity in this world is everything. I've always said to my kids, serendipity and the choices you make really are the two keystones of what happens to you in life. And the serendipity of joining Paul Weiss at that time and working with these great lawyers was one thing, but the choice I made was at this point to get to know some of these artists more than just clients, and to try to get to know them as individuals and as friends if I could. And the guy that I met very early on through John Wharton was, you know, one of the four geniuses I consider to be the people I worked with in my career, and that was Michael Bennett. And Michael had already become a wunderkind because of Company and Follies and several other shows he'd done. And of course, I just got to meet him on the cusp of when he started to develop a chorus line. So that really, for me, was I didn't even realize how monumental that was going to be in my career. It was monumental for the theater, what that show did. It was monumental for so many people who were involved in that show. And some of you, maybe some of you, who are as aged as I am, remember what happened in 1975, 76 when it opened, but it was really the equivalent of what's going on today with Hamilton. Slightly different though, I mean, the world was different then, but it was you know, just wild what happened in terms of the public attention to that show. So, you know, with Michael, that was really a stepping stone for me because I got to know and to represent so many people. Just that show alone. Robin Wagner, the set designer, Theron Musser, the greatest lighting designer in the world, Theoni Aldridge, you know, 6 Oscars and 20 Tonys for costumes, and Joe Papp, who developed the show with him. I could go on and on. Just that one client and that one show sort of opened up the entire world to me, but it also opened up opportunities to be very, very helpful as a lawyer. And I realized if I could find my way into doing something unique for these artists, because I wasn't an agent, I didn't really want to be an agent, you know, and I wasn't their money manager, although I advised them on their managers and their financial people and things. But I realized I could maybe help get whatever they wrote up on the stage, or whatever they directed up on the stage, and make it easier for people to make money and to be successful. And that niche turned out to be the financing of shows. because as I write in great detail in my book, in 1980, there was a show called Woman of the Year, and that show made headlines in the New York Times. This was running for almost 2 years. It made millions for all the artists and writers and everyone else, and the producers even with their fees, and the investors had gotten back about 4% of their money. And the investors were up in arms, and the Times, as it's wont, the Times tends to love to write pieces, especially at the theater when things are bad, not when they're good, because that's news, right? And they wrote a front page piece about Woman of the Year about how all the investors were basically screwed, without in so many words, because of the way these deals were structured. And it was shocking what happened. Almost without a second going by, anybody who was raising money at that time, the phone stopped. No one was calling back, no one wanted to invest, all the financing stopped, and people didn't want to be at the next cocktail party and feel like a fool. Because if you said at the next cocktail party, I'm investing in Broadway, they say, have you read the front page of the Times, you nuts? And there's a lot of truth in that piece. It was very well written. And it gave birth to what we all know of for the last few years of changing the whole economics of Broadway from gross deals to royalty pools. And over the last 30 years or so or more, royalty pools and then amortization and everything else that's going on today really restructured the entire economic landscape for Broadway. And I was in the middle of that. I felt like I was, again, serendipity. It was a great time for me to be there. And Musical 9 was the first musical that used a royalty pool, and we constructed it. Sam Cohen, who was a legendary agent, brilliant man at ICM, he was representing the writers and the owners of the show, and Tommy Toon, and I represented the producers and the people with the money, and we literally got together and worked through the night for a couple of nights, came up with a royalty pool, which saved the show because the investors and my clients said, with no uncertain terms, if you don't get something different than this gross deal that everybody gets, we're not doing the show. And that really was a sea change. More than a sea change. It was a tsunami, a typhoon, everything in one. Completely changed Broadway. And we're still living with it today in many respects. And so that was what I tried to develop in my career. I tried to be a resource for producers, theater owners, writers, authors, directors who needed help in getting their work done. It's no more complicated than that. But what that entails was a certain degree of diligence and perseverance and never saying you can't do it, that it's not going to work, because so many shows in the 70s didn't work financially at all. They were just failures, and it was a very difficult time. But out of difficulty sometimes comes, progress.
In reading your book, there was one interesting chart you had. You talked about a Broadway show that was grossing $800,000 in gross weekly box office receipts, and you took the example of a book writer who's getting 1.5% of the equivalent in the pool. And under a gross deal, they were getting $12,000 a week. Under the pool, they were getting $7,500 a week. And after amortization, they were getting $3,000. And it just brought into stark relief for me the fact that these royalty pools and amortization deals, which, look, I started out in this business as a producer, and I like the fact that, I was able to negotiate these deals, I was able to get subsidiary rights. But now that I'm representing authors for a living, I see the fact that these deals are really on the backs of the authors. The theater owners, which used to participate in the royalty pool, well, they opted out. The stars, no, they opt out. The other creatives, well, they get to do 2-3 shows a year. How many shows can a lighting designer light in a year? 3. I mean, they're constantly making money and they're constantly making a royalty. The authors, book writer, composer, lyricist, or a playwright, is spending years to write a single play. They get there, and yes, they maybe get an option fee up front. It's a little more now with amortization, maybe a lot more, but it's still, they spend years and years, and they're making $3,000 a week for a show that could run, even if it runs, a year. What did they make, $150,000? It doesn't seem adequate compensation. And the investors are, for the most part, the theater owners. So the theater owners are opting out of the pool, and they're saying, oh, I'm the investor, I have to get my money back. It seems to me to be unfair to authors. And I wanted to get your take on that, because obviously you live on both sides of this issue.
Well, you sound like Peter Stone, of course. And Peter, who was the head of the Dramatists Guild, fought really vigorously against royalty pools. And I say this in my book. I quote him saying that, I'm not going to give you the exact quote, I'm going to get the exact words, but it's a God-given right to authors to get gross. And that's how firmly he believed it. And he wasn't tongue-in-cheek, he meant it. And just, I'm sure most of you are sophisticated enough to know this, but just generally, it's very simple. If a show is doing $800,000 and you get a percentage of the gross, you get a percentage of $800,000. That's whether the show has made money that week, hasn't made money, where you just get it off the top. And that was true with directors, choreographers, designers, composers, lyricists, authors, etc., which can add up to 20% often. 20% of $800,000, $160,000. The sad fact was that the economics of Broadway, and the economics of almost anything, even book publishing and even motion pictures, can't bear that kind of formula. It just can't, because you are paying so much just to get the rights and the direction and the services. And then you have to pay all your other fees and salaries, everything else, advertising, marketing, actors, theater rent, everything else. And then whatever's left is left for the investors. And the fact of the matter was, no matter how Peter Stone could talk about this emotionally, this was, before we had computer programs, but it was the very beginning of it. And I would give him spreadsheets and say, look, Peter, you tell me, what do we do? And it'd be very simple. I'd say the show cost in those days, the show costs $3 million. And if we sell 75% of the seats in this theater at top ticket price, and remember, there were no premiums, that's how much money we're going to take in. We're going to take in every week on the average $500,000. And I've got to pay you 20% of $500,000. That's $100,000. And my costs, all my costs, are going to be $395,000. And then I've got theater rent, which is another $23,000. And now I'm left with, I'm just, generalizing. Now I'm left with $60,000 to pay back $3 million. So that means in 1 month, maybe I make $250,000. The show has to run a year and 4 months at 70-75% capacity just to get the money back. And that was a hit. Okay, that was a hit. Now I would do those same numbers at 60%. Now the show would have to run for 2 years or 3 years. And there was there was nothing to argue with, because the theater owners began in the beginning to work in the pools, but the theater owners then quickly had more shows coming in that they could handle. So they said, we want nothing of royalty pools, and they run the show. That's real estate. A theater, to a large degree, is real estate. If you can't get a theater, you can't get. I had lunch today with a producer who said to me he had this great play, and the director, everybody's fantastic. They may even have a mini star, not a big star. And he went to one of the theater owners yesterday and said, "Here's the play and everything." He said, "I have no theater for you. This is for next year. No theater for you." He said, "What do you mean? What about this theater, that?" He said, "No, I'm waiting for this musical, that musical." They're waiting for musicals to come into the White House. So the numbers did not lie. And you're right when you say it went on the backs of not just the authors, all the creative people. I know writing people can do 3 or 4 shows, but authors can write one show too. But all the creative people had to switch to this. And I saw it as a leveling the playing field. I know I'm biased about it, but because I was one of the architects of it. But otherwise, these shows would never have been produced. And so I tried to find a middle ground where you weren't raping the artists, but the producers could say to their investors, "Look, you have a shot. If the show does 70%, and you can just do it in numbers. I mean, this is how you make deals in the theater if you're knowledgeable about pools. Here's 70%, here's what it costs, here's what we could do, and if I can show my investors in my financing papers that in 10 months they have a shot to get their money back, they'll invest. Because if this show has Bette Midler in it, and I'm not talking about Hollow Dolly necessarily, but if it's a show based on I Want to Be a Producer, and she's going to be in it, they're going to say, "What are you talking about? You're going to do it." Well, you know what, after 10 months, where's Bette Midler going? I'm on stage. She's off. So anybody who invests in a big show with a star, they want to see their money back before the star leaves. Because how many stars replace stars? Peter Allen, when he was in Boy from Oz, they couldn't even sell the show when he went on vacation. They had to shut the show down. The first time in history of Broadway, the show was actually shut down.
Hugh Jackman.
Hugh Jackman. What did I say?
Peter Allen.
Peter Allen. This goes to show you, right? I mean, the two. And that's the power of someone like that. We tried, because I was heavily involved in the show, and I was a good friend of Peter Allen's. He was dead by then, unfortunately. We must have called 30, 40 agents, not stars. No one would even go near with a 10-foot pole. Who would have replaced Peter Allen? Are you serious? Like, all I can say, Bruce, is that argument, I know, and the other thing, which you're going to say, oh, well, the authors, this is what's fabulous about the field. And investors don't have this. The producer doesn't have this, the lighting designer doesn't have this, the matron doesn't have this, the ticket taker doesn't have it, the theater, it's called a copyright. Copyright in that play, in that music, and those lyrics are forever in a sense. I mean, I know they're not forever, it's limited time, it's forever. And the ownership of that, only in the theater, not in film business, book publishing, but you know, but it's theirs,
yes.
And they continue to get money year in and year after.
Which is a great segue. So we're taking the money away from the authors.
We didn't write this either.
We're taking the money away from the authors on the front end because you can't get the show up because the theater owners who have a real estate investment and are investing in the show, you know, they want to make sure they're getting rich. The author shouldn't get the money on the front end, and actually on the back end, we're going to take 40% of their money from all of...
For a limited period of time.
For a long period of time.
Depends on what it is.
Okay, but those options in the...
Let me give you an example.
What's that? So now, they can't make it on the front end, and on the back end, they're giving away the money. They're even giving away average, which to me sounds so ridiculous.
We're not giving it away.
Well,
giving a percentage.
A percentage because the argument is the producer has added so much value to the show, but for the producer it wouldn't be worth.
Would anyone buy Proof, one of the great plays that hadn't been done on Broadway?
I got it. But you know, the average author earns
$40,000 a year, and only 25% of that from writing in the theater. Right? The other things are teaching and whatever.
Understood.
So,
I agree.
you know, if we want writers to continue to write, we have to make it be it can't be just a labor of love. And I think it's skewed so far the other way. The authors that got together and formed the Dramatists Guild made a stand and said, we own our work and we are going to license it to you, and you can use it for these limited things. It's been chipped away from them and chipped away from them, and I blame the authors. They caved.
Yeah, but Bruce, now put yourself, well, you practiced with Al Silver. You sit in that room with a producer across from you, and whether it's Hamilton or Chorus Line or Wicked, all of which I know the history, none of those shows were thought to be big hits. None of them. Wicked, they were sure they were even going to bring it to New York. I represented Universal. They said this, they called me up when I opened in California and said, what do we do? This is a catastrophe. Nobody knows. We spent a fortune on this thing. For Universal it was nothing, but it was still a lot of money in the theater. Chorus Line? Nobody had a clue what this thing was going to be, including Michael Bennett, until he started developing it. All right? And Hamilton, when it first started, you know, but I don't need to give you that secret. That's obvious. You know, Hamilton, most people don't even know what Hamilton is. They think it's a refrigerator. So, I mean, before the play. And so, the artist has had the liberty, and now of course I'm being a lawyer, but the liberty of writing whatever she or he wants to put on paper. And it's whatever comes out of their head, and it's a creation, just like a book or a painting. And that's their baby, okay? And now they need to get that baby an education and to grow and develop and mature, right? And they're sitting across the table with the producer who says, I'll give you that opportunity. I'll give you that opportunity. But then he shows you, or she shows you, the fact of the matter that I can't get this show produced if I pay you 10% of the gross, which is what Arthur Miller would have gotten, or Tennessee Williams, or Eugene O'Neill got in the 40s. I can't do it. In those days, the first play I ever did, the play cost $150,000. That's what the play cost. And Ballroom, which was Michael Bennett's play in 1979, was the first play that cost $1 million. A musical cost $1 million. Before that, they were about $500,000, which was one in a year or two. Anyway, so you look at that author, and what is that author supposed to do? Can you say to them, can the dramatist go say to them, sorry, turn it down. Do not do this play. Can't. They want the play done. And I think you exaggerate when you say they get nothing. They do get some royalties. And if it becomes a Chorus, if it becomes a Wicked, and if it becomes a Hamilton, even though they sacrificed years before that, in those few cases, you know as well as I do, every one of those authors are multi-millionaires. So the pot at the end of the rainbow still exists. No one, I think, is crying for all the shows that make $1.5 million gross a week. It's the struggling ones that don't. But do you know how much money has been lost on Broadway this year? Have you any idea? Does anyone guess how much money has been lost on Broadway this year?
No.
Huh?
How much?
I haven't figured it out. But the last four shows amounted to about $65 million. Okay, and so if you extrapolate, because it's probably now up to $280 million. $280 million. Now to Donald Trump, that's nothing. Or to, Goldman Sachs, that's silly money. But to the theater, I mean, so I just think if you're going to be practical, if you're going to go forward, if you're going to try to get people's work done, you've got to get blood out of stone. That's what you gotta do.
Right. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that it's, to quote Donald Trump, it feels like it's a rigged system. Because the theater owners are the ones making all the money. Look, they have the real estate, it's in demand, supply and demand, I got that. But they're also the investors.
Sometimes. Not much anymore.
Well, maybe because they don't have to.
They don't have to.
Right, so that brings,
Why would
so to the extent if they did have to, they're making money on both ends. And if they don't have to, right, which that says to me that people are willing to invest. I think the investor today, well, I'll ask you a different question. How many, in all the shows you've done, how many investors have actually read the paper?
Oh, that's a great question.
So they're not investing because there's a royalty. But you know, the answer is
really a
obvious, they don't
rhetorical
read.
question.
Right. So they're investing, they're not concerned about, they're not investing because there's a royalty pool, they're investing because they love the show. Just like the author wrote it because they love the show. Why should the burden be on the creator?
Well, I don't think ignorance, is an excuse for larceny. Investors today are completely different than the investors of the 80s or 70s. Today, if I go to an investor and they don't know what the show is, they ask one question first: who's in it? And they don't mean who's in it like a great actor. Who's the star? If you don't say Al Pacino or Hugh Jackman or Peter Alan Hayes,
That would sell
those people, it's just like, oh, okay, what's it about? And then you tell them a little bit about it or whatever. Or you say to them, well, it's a revival of Fiddler on the Roof. Oh yeah, well, my mother's favorite show. And then they say, who's in it? Zero Mostel is dead, all those guys are dead.
Peter Allen.
Everything this season. This guy. Doesn't make sense. That's what the investors today, do they look at the papers? No, of course not. It gets even worse than that. When I was, for years, I had a lot of clients who had never invested in the theater. They had made money in other places in life, which is where most of the money, when you see those 45 people above the title.
Oh, man.
They are, we all know those are not producers. Those are people who wrote a check. And almost all those people have gotten money from another industry, okay? They made a lot of money, or they inherited it, or they were in another entertainment business, they're a movie studio, or they're a lawyer at Paul Weiss, who made a lot of money being a lawyer and wanted to put money in. They got money from somewhere else, okay? But a lot of those people came to me, many of them, and would say, I want to invest in whatever, STEM. And they knew very little, but they were smart enough to know that they wouldn't have a clue when they read these papers. And I don't blame them. It's a 60-page document, more of turgid, puts you to sleep immediately material. And they would hire me to look at the papers and advise them. And this was the curious thing. I would look at these papers and I would say to them, okay, and I do the same analysis for you. Based on what these papers say, this show has to run, 33 years. And they go, oh, that's terrible. If it does 150% business, it'll make its money back in 3 years. And then after the amortization in the pool, because you've taken so much from the authors, you've got to get back, because that's what happens now on amortization deals. After the show recoups, the investors have to give more money back to the authors, and they make money. I said, and then when you finally get into profits, there's so many profits being given away to so many different people. For your dollar that you put up, you'll get maybe 20 cents back every time there's. So you would think, when I first would do some of this, you would say, thank you very much. Here's your fee, I'm passing. They'd say, oh, well, I'm involved. I mean, this is the greatest. I think it's going to be huge. It's going to be enormous. And you say, absolutely, yeah, I'm on your side. I think it's going to be great. Usually I do not think it's going to be great. But I say it's fabulous. Because I was always very careful when I was practicing not to make a subjective judgment about the material, because it wasn't my role. And once or twice early in my career, as a very young lawyer, I stepped over that line and I got slapped. And it was right. That's not where people were coming to me. And I didn't read the book. I didn't go to the workshop at that point when I was younger. So I say, but that's what's going to happen. And they wanted anyone to invest because they were so passionate about the material and they wanted to take their chances. So even when I could verifiably demonstrate that this show, even when it recoups, is not going to make them any real money, they did it anyway. Why? Mike Nichols is a genius, or I'm not for any particular show, or Tommy Tune is a genius, or so-and-so is a star, is the greatest thing in, chopped liver and whatever. The theater is based so much on passion. I'm asked all the time, what do you need, what are the qualities to be a great producer? Not a great producer, be a good producer. And I always say that one of the first things is passion. When I go see a show that I have nothing to do with, and I'm fortunate to be a Tony voter, so I am invited to every show on Broadway, and I'm supposed to see every show on Broadway. I'm a man of us, I think, see everything. Sometimes they close before you can get there, sadly. But I'll often turn to my wife at the end of the show and say, well, I'm sure happy I didn't get involved in that show. And the reason for it is I always say to myself, would I have wanted to get up in the morning and go see that show in auditions and rehearsals or work on it and everything, and I look at it and say, why would I ever want to spend time with this material? It wouldn't have not. But then you'll see something and go, oh my God, that's why I'm doing what I do. So if you have that passion, you need that to begin with, because the obstacles are so enormous. The risk is so incredible. The challenges are daunting. The odds are against you. If you don't have that passion that you must do it more than anything else, don't even try. But then, the problem with passion is that it's basically an irrational human instinct, right? I mean, let's face it, if you go to bed with someone you haven't, and you're passionate about them, you haven't figured out on the projection sheet whether you're going to make money or not, right? It's not a scientific analysis. You're in love. You've got to take that passion now and counterbalance it with an intelligent, business-minded outlook. Can I somehow make this into a commercial enterprise? Now, if you're passionate and you own your own not-for-profit theater and you have $1 billion to spend, that's fine. I mean, you just do what you want to do. David Merrick did that. He had a foundation when he made so much money, and he produced a lot of wonderful plays that didn't have a prayer on Broadway, Tennessee Williams and others, and they all flopped. But it was his foundation. They lost money. It was a tax thing. But he was passionate about the theater, whatever you say about David Merrick. But assuming for the 99.99% of all the rest of us who need to go and raise money and get people to believe in what you're doing, you have to sort of harness all that enthusiasm and say to them, but this is how I think we can get our money back, and this is how I think it'll be successful. So it is those two elements where when people ask me, what do you need? And the first one, you can't teach, you can't read about it. It's either in your soul and your heart or not, and then get out and work on being arbitrage. But if the other one, if you want to be a good producer, that's where the training, the knowledge, and I think the right business instincts have to come into play, and that's what makes a good producer. You can't have one without the other.
How would you feel as a producer if I said, look, if the show's a hit and everybody's making money and you've recouped all your investment, at that point, or maybe it's your recoupment plus 10% or 20% or whatever. At that point, you have the benefit of your bargain. How about letting the author keep the subsidiary rights?
Well, it's a
If
good.
you haven't made the money back, if you're in the hole, well, okay, then let's try to pay it.
I think it's a very fair point, and there's been progress. Over the last 10 years, the authors have whittled away at the amount of money that the producers get from it. Not too many. And it all started with Lincoln Center. We represent Lincoln Center, it's not for profit. And Andre Bishop and Bernie Gersten said, you know what, it's sort of your theory, these people work so hard. And the model contract that we developed for Joe Papp, the first one, the shows like Chorus Line, where you developed them and then they made money and gave money back, and then it went to the Theater Club, Verizon, all these theaters. And it started at Lincoln Center. It was the model that we created for years. Everybody used it. They had a different theory. They said, we want to be fairer to the writers. And they do not take subsidiaries. And then about 7 or 8 years ago, Oscar Eustace came to me and said, I think there's a lot of truth to this. I'm upset by it. I remember teaching a class at Yale that was being given by Richard Nelson. And he made a very impassioned speech about this, and we debated in the class just what we're doing now. And that resulted in Oscar and I came up with a formula where we cut back on subsidiaries. So that message has been heard by the not-for-profits.
Right, we're only taking a few percentage, right?
Yeah. Well, no, but if they produce themselves like Chorus Line, or they move it themselves like Lincoln Center, they get the full percentage. And so that has helped. But of course, they're Elia Mozner, they're supposed to be the ones in there, they're supposed to give back anyway. I haven't seen a lot of that charity with the commercial producers, but as a corollary to that, though, which is really a different idea of what happened on Hamilton with the give back from the so-called laboratory agreement. I talk about in my book the history of the workshop. Before a Chorus Line, if you said to someone, we're going to do a workshop in the theater, they thought they were going to send you to a belt factory. So nobody knew what a workshop was in the theater. And Michael, again, his genius was, I can't do a musical under the current Actors Equity deal. Because on the Actors Equity deal, I immediately have to go into rehearsal, and I have to pay all these rehearsal salaries, which are very expensive, and I can't afford to do that with this show called Chorus Line. It's going to take 2 years to do it. I need a long period of time to figure out what it is. Is it a movie? Is it a documentary? Is it a play? Is it a book? And so he said to these actors, come and work for me, outside of equity, outside of everything, and Joe Papp financed it for $100 a year. And they all, did anything. They would, fall in front of a train in order to work on stage full time. Nobody had any work. And so for $100 a week, he did 3 workshops, and everybody worked for peanuts, and they slowly, organically created this thing that started with just a bunch of interviews. Nothing.
And they all had a little piece to share.
Yeah. No. When he started that, I said, Michael, you can't do this. You can't get people in the room, and from a legal point of view, all these actors are giving you lines and everything. You've taken all their stuff from the tapes. They'll have a claim. You'll have 150 people suing you if you ever do the show saying, that's mine, it's copyright, I wrote that. So, because everybody wanted, again, practicality intervened, and I explained to everybody, if you want to be in this process, here's $1, but you have to turn over all your rights as an actor or something to Michael who will hold on to it. Because if you don't do that, it'll never happen. Nobody's going to invest in a show that has 150 lawsuits. Did the show, no one ever believed anything would happen. We all know the result. The biggest hit ever. The day after the show, I promise you, the day after the show, at the public, not on Broadway, they opened at the public. Michael called me and said, okay, now I have to do something for the actors. Voluntarily, no legal obligation, worked out a deal where he gave them out of his share, not Marvin Hamler's, not Nicholas Dante, not James Kirkland, not Joe Craven, his personal share of direction, choreography, and book. A piece of the gross, at that point he had no royalty to lose, a piece of the gross, and a piece of his subsidiary rights as an author. And that gave birth to a little workshop agreement. Till today, that exists. So if you do a workshop on a musical, you do use the very, very document that we worked out after, of course, when the pandemic evolved. Fast forward to 4 years ago. Again, the producers. Why do I have to give all these actors money after the show opens from the authors? Why are we giving money to these actors? Bad enough I have to give them to the producers. I don't give money to the actors. Can I do something else? But I still want to hire them to develop my show. Right? So Actors Equity, and I really am not going to comment about why they did it to not do this, created a new variation on the workshop called Laboratory Agreement, which said that instead of the actors working for several $100s a week, they get $800 a week. More than twice or twice as much as they usually get. So now the actors are getting paid more. In return, they gave away. Equity permitted them to give away anything in the future. Now that was true with Michael, there was no agreement, but then he voluntarily gave them. So when Hamilton opened, and it was the second coming, and they saw huge amounts of money being made by everyone, including Lin-Manuel, they were not happy. They never made a legal claim, because they had no legal claim. They had given away all their rights for $800 a week. They really had no claim. But they had something called moral suasion. And you tell me, I mean, when they're hauling in now $600,000-$700,000 a week profits, and who knows how long the show will run, millions and millions and millions, it'll be probably $1 billion gross. You know, how do you say no to many of these actors who did contribute quite a bit? So the producers, I think, rightfully and smartly agreed to make a deal. So now those actors who participated are getting participation. But it's interesting, isn't it, that, you know, what's the expression? You pay the price and get your thing, or something like that. I don't know. There's some expression. They got their $800, they gave away, you know, there was a deal. They didn't have to agree to that. They could have said, forget about it, I want my $400, that's plenty. I can, you know, pay my electric bill on that and I'll starve, but I want my future. They didn't want that. Again, on the other hand, these actors will agree to anything. I mean, talk about playwrights. I mean, the actors that I've known and do know today, I did a documentary called Every Little Step. It's about the audition process that we went through for Chorus Line. The stories that I can tell you that I, not only from that film, actors who would come to auditions, young men and women, who literally did not have lunch that day because they used that money to pay their vocal coach for the audition. Very common, very common. And so, talk about needy and the willingness to sort of give up everything to get a part. Nothing compared to writers. I don't even remember what the question was.
It was a great answer.
I understand that Book of Mormon was a precedent that Hamilton sort of leaned on. I think that the authors gave 1% to the initial cast of Book of Mormon. So that was something that I think was one of the reasons that the Hamilton initial cast was.
Yeah, and you're right, and because, look, it's very hard for a producer, if they want to maintain a relationship with its cast. I mean, again, it's about how you are as a producer. There are a lot of producers who they never show up next week. The stage manager, company manager, take care of it, and they're just raking money or whatever. I mean, they got other things. But if you're a producer who really cares about your cast and spends time back there, how do you look at them in the eye? Right? When they know the money you're hauling in and Sure, they're making a $1,200, $1,300 a week, whatever they're making, but that's a joke. So but how many Hamiltons and how many Book of Mormons are there? Right? Look at Waitress, and look at, well, we don't know what's going to happen with Waitress. Look at Bright Star, and look at Neverland, and look at Tuck, and look at, go on and on and on. There are 11 musicals that opened this season, 4 survived so far. So, look, if you have you don't need a heart, you need to be alive to not feel some burden. And if you have a heart, you're going to do really great. But not a lot of that exists. I was saying when I walked in here, Samuel French is a really amazing institution. It's one of the bedrocks of why the theater survives, because it's where an author makes money. They don't make money on Broadway. There's no future for playwrights really on Broadway except a handful. There are plays now, not musicals. And the man who ran this company was Abbott Van Nostrand when I started, and he was one of the giants in the business. He was a gentleman and loved the theater and loved the. He went to every opening. Every opening I saw Abbott. I go up to him, I make sure I say hello to him. And that was the gentleman era. I grew up in the beginning with gentlemen and ladies. Ladies and gentlemen of the theater. The great lady agents. There weren't a lot of women producers, just weren't. But the agents, Audrey Wood, Catherine Brown, these were sophisticated, knowledgeable people who could sit down, Catherine Brown with Darryl Zanuck, and read Margaret Mitchell's book, Gone with the Wind, and tell Darryl Zanuck what he had to do to make the movie work, and scream at him on the phone in her very polite New England accent. And she was absolutely phenomenal. Audrey Wood, who could read a play and tell a playwright exactly where they should begin and end the second act. These were great giants in the back and backstage, behind the curtain. And sadly, it's a different world. There's not a lot of politesse, no less politeness. And it's too bad, but there's so much money involved, like everything else in this world. And Americans tend to want more and more, and we make more and more, and we want to spend more and more. The theater is now, if anyone had told me when I was 30 years old that the theater would be a multi-billion-dollar business, I would have thought they were on crack heroin. No, I remember John Morton saying to me, my mentors, he said, you're involved in the theater. He said, this is a nickel and dime business. And he really meant it. He said, this is you're in this big firm, right, where we really make our money, it's a big corporate, but we have this great entertainment group that we're leading the theater. So he really said that, and I often compare Broadway still to everyone who had all these producers, because there are many producers. They're producers for every different show. You do have the occasional Scott Ruby, because for shows on, but mostly there are different producers for every different show. And I liken it to, in the old days, going into Delancey Street, where you had all these little stores, fish store, and a bakery, and a dime store, and little stores, but they're trying to make money every week. They're only looking at the gross for that week. They're only looking at that show. They're only looking at whether July 4th grosses are going to be terrible or not so bad. That's all they care about, their little show, because it's all these different businesses. There is a trade association, Broadway League, but there really isn't a lot of cooperation. And so that's what you have on Broadway. But the idea that you would have a Phantom of the Opera or a Les Mis that made that kind of money was unheard of, because Pajama Game, Damn Yankees, not West Side Story, not Chorus Line, but the older 50s, those were American musicals written for Americans who understood that tempo, that style, that humor. Very, very American, how to succeed in business. Maybe they worked in West End, little bit, you know, they would work, some of them would work, but they were not international shows. I mean, doing How to Succeed in Business in Germany. But Chorus Line was really the first international hit. And I think it was an international hit that was all about truth, about individuals, about striving for what you love. And then the British invasion created the true international musical.
Especially Cats, where you didn't have to speak the language.
Right. But even all those spectacles, they were spectacles. They are spectacles. And tourists want spectacles. You go stand in line tonight to see who's going to see Phantom. It's all foreign. I think I know who's picking this. And I'm not sure it's not there. It's great for them. It's running now, you know, what is it, 400 years?
We have a few more questions.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going on too long. I won't speak to the questions.
The current pool system you've spoken about extensively, do you see that as sustainable for much longer? And what do you, if you have to look into your crystal ball, what do you see as the next step in the evolution?
Well, interestingly enough, the pool does not work for gigantic hits. All right? This is too complicated a mathematical equation to get into it here. But take my word for it. The pools work brilliantly when the show is working from 50% capacity to 70, 75, 80%. Because that's when there's not that much money being made. So you need to, whatever money's being made, to share it with everyone, the author, the director, the producer, the investors. There's not that much money being made. When you get to premium pricing and things like $2 million gross a week, you don't need a pool. Because there's so much money being made, so much, you can afford to pay grosses. So Wicked, for example, has never never done a pool because the grosses are so huge. They just pay gross. They don't have a pool. And show like
Because they would end up spending more money.
they would,
in the
yeah,
pool.
because you see, if you had a pool and you're making, the investors were making, you know, say every week $1 million. Now they're going to pass that $1 million back to the authors, and the authors now are going to make more money in the pool than they did with the gross. It switches. So for the blockbusters, the pool, and this is just new, we haven't had these shows. I mean, this is enormous that we have in the last 15 years. The pool doesn't work. But these shows that I've just mentioned, the day will come when they need a pool. Even Cats have, I mean, yeah, we worked at a pool when, after the show was running forever because it was not doing that great. And it will come and they've had even sometimes with Phantom low points, the producers go back and say, look, if you want us to continue to run the show, we've got to make some money. We're not going to run this show year in and year out and just pay grosses now that everything's done. So those gross deals and pool deals modulate back and forth depending on the negotiations. For the future, I don't see that really changing much. Amortization really cut even more so because the amortization means that the producers take, besides the pool, a whole cut of gross right off the top for the investors because the money is so, the production costs are so high, $20 million. But there's really nothing, no place to go. We've cut it back to the bone. But I see that, I mean, I'm very happy to see that people are malleable enough to now work within that system to create something right. I mean, that's what you need. You need a producer and the writers and their agents working together to come up with something that's fair. But I think the future will continue to have pools and amortization and gross for the big hits.
Yeah, I have a question. Seems to be talking about a lot of profit and things going on Broadway. Well, currently, there's a show on Broadway. It's about to close. Four tourney winners on the show. One of them's about to leave. And I heard the show is making money, but they're still closing it because one of the actors is leaving. Doesn't the investors want their money back, or they made so much money they can afford to close the show? Shuffle them, yes.
Yeah,
Well, I don't understand that logic. Something doesn't seem to make sense there.
Yeah, it's a sad
Well,
story.
I don't think that's true. You got three Tony winners. I mean, should they find a replacement for her? One month, stop the show. So,
It wasn't selling.
Well, I think we were all very, very surprised
all right.
when we read that, and as you know, I was in the paper about it.
Yeah.
I was stunned. I wasn't here. I was out of town, and I read it on Facebook. And I said, this can't be. Now, the show's very expensive.
Okay.
It costs a lot of money. It costs a lot to run. It's not a cheap show at all, if you've seen it. But the show had no advance to speak of, almost no advance, which is a serious problem. Why didn't it have advance? Shovel along. I mean, nobody knows the name. Nobody knows the title. Did it have a star? Now, this is the irony of the show. No one would tell you that Audrey McDonald, who we all love and adore and consider a star, no one would tell you, though, that that was a name that was going to be huge box office. Yeah, she would sell tickets to all of us, from all of us. But not, she's not Al Pacino. She's not Bette Midler. She's not a name. She's not an international name.
Right.
She's not even a national name. But they had all these other great names, right? When you put them all together, you think out of that comes this cataclysmic result. No, that doesn't work on Broadway at all. That is gone with the wind years ago when people thought, well, I can't afford one huge star, but I'll get 6 very well-known names. Nobody cares. The public that buys musicals. So they had very little advance. The reviews were mixed. They got completely ignored at the Tony Awards, except
Why didn't they wait?
No, yeah, except but when Audrey announced that she was pregnant and she was leaving, the advance that they had, which was nothing, but the grosses that they were doing took a precipitous drop. And now I didn't make this decision. It's not my show. It had nothing to do with it. But I think there's no reason in the world why those producers would close that show if it weren't for the fact there was no future for it.
Okay.
They knew they would be losing money every week, probably $150,000 to $200,000 a week based on the projections. And the investors, he may have had in reserves $1 million, but he had to make a decision, I'm sure. I'm making this up, and I'm speculating what probably happened. He said, I have 2 choices. I can give him $1 million back, close the show. Or I can keep it running for another month or 6 weeks and lose that $1 million. And he made a business judgment rule. He would never have closed that show if it had any strength.
Okay.
The big surprise was that so much of the bottom really dropped out with Audrey. And the question nobody can answer, if she had stayed in, would it have continued to, would it have made any money, a lot of money? I don't know the answer to that. But surely there's no one can tell you for sure that it worked. Yeah.
You mentioned 2 things. You mentioned nonprofit and then commercial theater. And nonprofit, they, by virtue of what they do, their costs are a fraction of what a commercial producer has to put out the same show. And yet, when it comes time for awards, you're fighting against the same, it's not a level playing field, because a nonprofit, if they win a Tony, it's very prestigious, but they've already sold their tickets. They've got butts in the seats. A commercial producer, that Tony can be the difference between life and death, as it was with Gentleman's Guide, which was hanging on by the skin of their teeth.
Without the Tony, would never have.
And then they got the Tony, and it went right up to 99, 100%. And the thing is do you see at some point, being a Tony voter, that there would be some sort of division, should be a division, where it's nonprofit and commercial, but not against each other? There's no way you can compete in the cost of the house, the cost of the contracts themselves, right? 40% of
Yeah, they make special deals with the unions.
Absolutely.
Not.
Yeah.
Well, did everyone hear the question?
Not just for you.
Yeah, I mean, the question basically is, and it's been something that's been debated for the last 20 years at least, is it fair for the not-for-profit theaters who get breaks from the unions for salaries and don't have to pay taxes, of course, on their income, And so therefore, everything's cheaper for them to compete in the same arena as the commercial producer, who pays taxes, who pays higher royalties, pays higher payments to the unions and everything else, salaries. Why is that fair? There are so many ways to address this on both sides, but let me give you, I think the most salient one for the not-for-profit is, I'll give you a specific example. Joe Papp was the head of the public theater, believed in Michael, before Chorus Line, had no money, gave Michael Bennett $100,000, and that's in 1974. It's like $2 million today. He had no money to do, but he gave him that money on a whim. And the public made tens of millions of dollars. Today it would have been $1 billion because we didn't have premium pricing. Joe Papp died a very well-off, upper middle class guy. He was never very rich. He never had 4 cars. He didn't have homes all over the place. He wasn't a rich man. All that money by law went back to the theater. It did not go in the coffers of any individual other than salaries and whatever. So people who work in the not-for-profit sector, whether it's Joe Papp, Barry Grove, Lynn Meadow, Todd Hames, Tim Sanford, all the people who run these theaters, they have made a bargain. The bargain is, I will have a guaranteed salary, because the board guarantees me something. No producer has a guaranteed salary. Nobody's paying me a penny to do anything. The only thing in my life when you do a show is money going out until the show is in, right? That's all you see. Yeah, I write in my book, when you get to the producer's deal, how about me? When do I start getting something? It takes a long time. But the not-for-profit gets grants, gets contributions, gets everything else, and they get their salaries and they live quite well. They're not millionaires, but they live quite well. In return, they give them all those big rewards, all those pots of gold that everybody wants. So from a not-for-profit point of view, that's the impetus, or that's, I suppose, the reason to say to the commercial producer, well, you know, they don't have the bargain you have. They're never going to get the pot that you want. But the more important thing is, if it weren't for the not-for-profit sector today, there'd be nothing on Broadway. Wouldn't be Hamilton. There wouldn't be Waitress. There wouldn't be none of the plays. Wouldn't be Humans. Nothing. I mean, Lion King. It's Disney. Book of Mormon's a little different, although they developed that. That was different. But all essentially 80 to 90% of everything you see on Broadway today begins in the not-for-profit sector. So the commercial producer has benefited hugely, as Bernie Sanders says, but from the not-for-profit sector. That's the wellspring of virtually everything that's on Broadway. And so you pick that show out of that crop of not-for-profits, and you bring it to Broadway, and you create, you know, a forest for yourself, producer, and the not-for-profit gets, you know, a little piece. They do quite well. But Rent, you know, the started off Broadway. The commercial producers were there from the beginning, and they got money out of it. But none of these commercial producers saw this show before the not-for-profit saw it. So this is a subject that I literally spent 3 days talking about. We had a conference in Washington a few years ago. This is a very complicated issue, and you raise a very good point. The question is when the enhancement money, which is a commercial producer goes to, say, the Manhattan Theater Club and says, I love the play you're producing, I'd love to bring it to Broadway, but would you do it first? And then the Barry Grove says, yeah, I'd love to do it, but the show's going to cost $1 million, and my budget only has $700,000. So the commercial producer says, okay, I'll give you $300,000 for that show. I'll enhance it for $300,000. In return for that, the commercial producer has the exclusive right to move it to Broadway if it's a hit. Okay? Those deals developed in the late 80s when producers suddenly woke up and figured out exactly what I just said, which was that everything's coming from the not-for-profit sector anyway. Plays are too expensive. I can't afford to do a play on Broadway. Now it's $3.5 million to do a play. It used to be $1 million. So, I'll just use the not-for-profits to get a cheap audition. I'll go to the not-for-profits and I'll get my hands on this show exclusively and I'll give them enhancement money. So that's what happened. And by getting that, they literally, got an exclusive put, as it were, to get the show. That was de rigueur for many years, for about 10, 12 years. In fact, there was a not-for-profit manager who lost his job in one of the not-for-profits because he did a whole season of nothing but enhancement deals. And again, I talk about in the book, that's virtually, that almost will assure you that you'll lose your tax. You can't just live as a not-for-profit taking money from all these commercial producers and producers saying, okay, goodbye, that's not what you do. He lost his job, and rightfully so. Because he just got out of control with this stuff. Today, did I just say I had lunch with a not-for-profit producer? I said to him, so how many enhancement deals have you done this year? Guess what? Commercial producers realize that there's very little opportunity on Broadway for straight plays right now. That if they give $300,000 to these companies, the show will be produced, they may get good reviews, but there's no place to go. There's no place to move it. The plays don't have a public, even if you can get a theater. This guy said he had this great play, and he went to one of the theater owners, and the theater owner says, I don't have a theater for you. He said, how could you not have a theater for me? I don't need the theater until next March. No, because there are 3 musicals that want the court, which is a playhouse. So the producers have sort of turned off on this thing of just giving money to a not-for-profit and hoping and praying it's going to be a hit, because there have been so many hits in the off-Broadway sector in the last 10 years, and they go nowhere, mostly because they don't have a star. They don't have someone like Jake Gyllenhaal. Jake Gyllenhaal, I mean, Manhattan Theater Club, it ran, made a lot of money there, but they still could not move that, which is sort of amazing.
Well, what about musical enhancement money? I mean, something like Bread,
It's
there's
so
some money put in around the same time.
But that's the old days. Those don't exist anymore. It now costs the not-for-profits to do a musical $3-4 million. They don't have that money in there, so they have to ask the commercial producer $2 million for it. And most not-for-profits don't have the facilities to really do a development deal. Bright Star, or Waitress, or Once. Those small musicals can be developed off Broadway. I'm going to go out next week to see War Paint at the Goodman. I'm hearing, very good things. And the smallish musicals still can be done in the regionals with commercial producers, as is War Paint. So that's still possible, but they're very expensive and they're controlled by the commercial producer. The not-for-profit has a piece if it moves, but it's not really their show. They're really giving them space to show their material.
So it's the commercial producer that's saying, oh, I want this director, or these designers, and this cast.
Now that's very dangerous, because from a legal point of view, if you're a not-for-profit and you're doing showing your theater with your money, even though it's not all the money, this is a bright line that I always told my clients to watch. They must control that pocket. You cannot do an enhancement deal and take $1 million for someone and produce a $4 million musical in your not-for-profit theater and have that person dictate to you everybody that's on the stage, and what you spend and what you're not, and what you design. You have to be able to demonstrate that you have the control of that enterprise. Because you're then taking your money and really basically giving up the control.
But if you have enough to say, I like this director, you're pretty much
informally.
Yes.
Informally, but you don't want to show an IRS auditor that you gave away to a commercial person all of your control of your funds for a particular show, that's the end of your exemption.
Not back profit.
And it's not what you should be doing. I've talked to Nakarata, this conference we did a few years ago, we talked about this, is that that's not what you're supposed to do. Zelda Big Fish Handler and Joe Pavlo started the not-for-profit movement. These were people of the theater who wanted to help playwrights do what they wanted to do. They wanted to do, not what the producer wanted to do. And a lot of not-for-profits have lost their way because they see Chorus Line, they see Rent, they see others where all this money has been made, and that's what they want that too. But once every generation.
Let's take one more question.
Yes, you pick.
Oh, God, yours will be law, mine will be more Christian. No.
Too quick.
Okay.
And I won't belabor.
It's fascinating to hear you talk about things that we call standard now and realize that they were just things that guys made up in a room when the crisis arrived, right? Or the business changed in some way. And I wanted to ask what your thought was. Somebody proposed streaming to me the other day, and a contract arrived for an HD production. And I'm looking at it, and I realize when I normally look at a contract, I think to myself, well, this is standard, or this is average. But this is streaming. There is no standard. It's all brand new. What makes sense if you thought about this? And what do you think it's going to do with anything?
It is and it isn't new. I haven't had time in a way. I want to find out what the results were. I don't really know how many people stream. Up to now, it's just a variation of HD and movie theaters and putting them and live. We've done that before.
Right.
Scam started that as well, where you can go and pay $20, or you could see it on TV on pay-per-view. Remember that you had special pay, you pay $20 for one time you see it on television. Those have all failed miserably. No one cares. No one wants to look at it. There's no public there for it. Now, streaming, I have no idea how that did. My guess is, right now, it's not much of anything. I don't think it's got too much of a future right now. Streaming is a very specific kind of entertainment for a specific audience. The theater, for better or worse, is still an older audience. I mean, like having things like, the entertainment stuff and, Hamilton, which brings in a younger audience. But if Hamilton were streamed, I think it'd be very successful now, given its notoriety. But in most cases, people have not responded to seeing on the small screen these things. The resurgence of live music on the network is sort of interesting. That's worked. But those are like completely produced things for television. Grease has been the most successful because they had a live audience. It really works. Many of the others didn't really do all that well. They did okay. Bob Greenblatt, who a good friend of mine who was really championing these, the head of NBC, he and I had breakfast a week or two ago, and he said, "Look, John, I love them. They've been very good to me at NBC. Let me do this stuff." But he basically was saying, we don't make good money on this stuff. And they don't. They don't really make a lot of money on it. The authors make no money. And it gives work for the actors. But the future of streaming is, I don't know. I just don't know whether people really want to stream at that moment a live performance and they have to be there then and see it. But up to now, all those variations have been failures. They've lost a lot of money. And they're expensive, it costs like $2 million to do these things. And after you pay the distributor and everybody else on the network and the cable companies and everything else, it's like nothing left. Nothing left for the producer.